Welcome back. 7:24 on a smoky Tuesday morning, and as school resumes, Children First Canada releasing its annual Raising Canada report this morning. Children First Canada CEO Sara Austin joining us this morning. Sara, thanks so much for taking time for us. And you know what really stood out right off the bat are some stats around mental well-being when it comes to our children, really standing out in this year's report. And if we can just start by going through a few of them, starting with this bullying stat.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks so much for having me. The report is full of pretty alarming data around the health and well-being of our kids, but one that really jumped out at me as a parent is that 71% of our students, between the ages of 12 to 17 have experienced bullying in the past year, and perhaps even more alarming, only 25% of them felt they were supported by their teachers and schools to be able to address that. Right. Clearly our kids are struggling in very significant ways with bullying, whether it's bullying that's happening in the classroom, in the schoolyard, or online, and not feeling supported by their teachers or by their other caring adults to be able to to fully address it and bring it to a halt. And so those are some really concerning statistics that show that our kids are struggling and really point to the need for support.
Yeah, this decrease in the percentage of youth who reported very good or excellent mental health, this has really dropped in the past 10 years as well.
It has indeed, and I think we need to think about the big picture of what our kids are struggling with. When we think about the top 10 threats to children, whether it's bullying or mental health, poverty, child abuse, these are not isolated issues. Our kids are struggling on many different fronts. And so not surprisingly, if our kids are experiencing bullying, growing up below the poverty line, or facing existential threats like climate change, it's not surprising that we're going to see this overall decline in their mental health and well-being. Our kids are facing enormous pressures. It's very difficult to be a child today. Parents are doing their very best to support their kids, but they need more support. This can't simply rest on the shoulders of parents or kids themselves. We need this community to rally around them, but we also need policymakers, provincially and federally, to step up to prioritize the health and well-being of our children.
Yeah, and I want to get that into a moment. Before we get into sort of some of the calls to action that you're supporting, talk about this increase in child poverty as well. This stood out to me.
It was very alarming to see that we've seen the greatest increase in child poverty since 2017. Fully 13.4% of our kids are growing up below the poverty line, struggling with basic survival needs, whether it's adequate housing or nutritious food to eat every day. Think about so many of our kids going to school without a healthy breakfast or lunch, and what that means not only for their physical well-being, but their ability to learn, to pay attention, to behave in school, to form healthy relationships. We saw some modest improvement around child poverty during the height of the pandemic because governments were really prioritizing supports for families and for communities. But with the withdrawal of those supports, we're seeing kids drastically slide back into poverty again. Speak to local organizations like Brown Bagging for Kids or the Food Bank. They're seeing escalating demands for their supports, particularly from families with young children. It really points to a generation at risk and an urgent need for action.
Yeah, so let's talk about that action. I'll give you the magic wand. What are some of the key things you'd like to see happen here to solve some of these issues?
Of course, we want to see tangible action happening on all the top 10 threats to children, but we also are looking at some broader supports that would move the needle on all of these issues. We've called for a national strategy for children and youth and the appointment of a federal commissioner so that there's greater accountability and a plan of action to move us forward. We want to see federal investments in a children's budget. Kids represent 25% of our population and 100% of our future. They deserve an equitable share of resources, whether it's for public health or otherwise, and so we want to see those bold investments being made in children. And last but certainly not least, we want to see children and youth being recognized as leaders and change makers, being involved in decisions in their families, in their schools, and all the way at the policy level so that children can actually have a meaningful say in decisions that affect their lives.
Yeah, well, some concerning stats, so hopefully we will see some policy movement on all of them. Thank you so much for your time, Sara. We always appreciate it. That is the CEO of Children First Canada, Sara Austin.